I'm a mum of a toddler, and I feel like everyone around me is constantly talking about screen time. So my mum's group, my friends, I'm seeing discussions on Facebook. What can you tell me from a speech perspective about screen time and language development?
Good question. It is so topical at the moment, and I think something we're constantly talking about. I think the biggest thing to remember with screens and language development is that children learn best through what we call serve and return interactions. So kind of like we're having now, I say something and you respond, the back and forth that happens naturally in conversations and interactions. In comparison, screen time is quite passive and it doesn't have that same back and forth. Children will sit in front of a screen, but there's not that opportunity for them to respond to something, take another turn in the conversation, and kind of progress that interaction the same way we would when we're speaking back and forth with another person. And that's really the best thing for their language development.
Like, what about those shows that kind of talk to you when you talk back that can teach your child language? Is that right?
Sometimes these educational videos are a bit more interesting because they use a really interesting voice and engaging pictures. So children do seem more interested. I think what often happens is they're interested in copying the words, but that doesn't necessarily mean they understand those words. It's being used in a very specific situation. Someone has talked to them through it and usually asked them to say something after them or, actively engage in that.
Yep.
But it doesn't mean very much to them. And when they walk away from that show, yes, they learn some new words and some new vocabulary from those shows, but it's not quite the same as having that back and forth in context.
Yeah, I guess they could show me an apple and I might say banana and they would still say, great job.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so that's serve and return. So does that then work with things like FaceTime or video chatting if we've got grandparents in a different state?
Yeah, I think that's a really nice way to be a bit more intentional about screen time, right? So it's not realistic to say we can't use any screen time. That's just not going to be part of the world that we're currently living in.
Yeah, and that might be a good way to shorten the screen time as well, I guess, if they get really sick of mum asking questions all the time.
Exactly. And we don't want to overwhelm them or you with the questions, but it is just a nice way to, I think make it a bit more finite, like you said. Something else you can do is just try and make it a more interactive experience. Sit with your child while they're watching the program and ask them questions or talk about what you're seeing. Yep. Have a bit of a discussion around it so it's less of that passive viewing and there is some more language and some interaction built into the conversation. And I think the opposite of that would be programs that the child is watching, that because there's less of that back and forth interaction and it is more passive, there's less opportunity for them to relate that back to their own world and their own experiences and what's present and meaningful to them.
Okay, so I'm thinking if it's a show talking about sharing, that's something she can relate to because we talk about sharing all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also something you're doing when you're playing with her, right? I'm sure you're having those interactions where you're going, it's mummy's turn. Okay, now it's your turn. And she can physically relate, that word and that language back to those actions and it's more meaningful for her. Are there any other shows you've noticed that your child responds better to or that you prefer with screen time?
I know that whenever there's a show that is really bright and full on and just kind of loud music, different from a song, just loud music and sounds, she does get really wound up and it's really hard to then transition onto the next activity. I find when we're watching shows that are, a bit quieter, still colourful, but maybe just a bit softer, actually telling a story, that's a lot easier to engage with. And she's generally pretty happy after those and happy to turn the TV off.
What you've kind of talked about there is that difference between shows that are really overstimulating for children and noticing that difference between bright noises and colours and really intense, energetic dialogue and really fast-paced programs versus those more low stimulation shows that have a bit more of a story, like you said. And I think they're a really nice choice and a nice way to, again, be a bit more intentional about that screen time. It is so prevalent, these screens, and we can't fully just, get rid of them and say no screen time. It's just not something that's practical. But picking shows like that and shows that you've noticed are a bit less stimulating and don't cause that same type of overreaction, being more intentional in terms of making that interactive, using them to have back and forth discussions like with other family members. I think, and also remembering that there are other activities that we can do to help develop language and, you know, keep children engaged beyond the screens. So one thing that comes to mind is book reading, which is such a valuable activity for language learning. We do know that reading to children 6 to 7 times a week, and it doesn't have to be for long, maybe just 10 minutes to start, can boost their development by about 12 months by the time they start school. So it is really valuable. And I think something that's really helpful to remember is book reading doesn't necessarily have to mean reading any or all of the words on the page. There's so much language that comes out of the pictures in books and the interaction that comes out of talking about what could happen next or looking at pictures that your child is interested in. That's really valuable for their language learning. And it doesn't have to be a dedicated sit down. You have to listen to this story for 10 minutes. I'm going to read it. We're going to go page by page. There's so much language that can come out of a more back and forth, that serve and return interaction. Around the pictures or the content of the story as well.
So on my days off, I try to go without screens as much as possible, especially in the morning. I do find as it gets to the evening and I need to start making dinner and getting things organised, I find I'm kind of leaning on the screens a little bit. I feel a bit guilty about it and I'm just not kind of sure what the alternative is.
It's really hard, I think, with all of this discussion around screen time, there is a lot of guilt coming up. I don't think it's realistic to say no screens, don't use them. And sometimes there's just no capacity to do everything else. So I think just using some of these strategies like we've been talking about, trying to be more intentional about it, picking the programs that you are putting on, things like that can be really helpful. And I think also remembering there are so many opportunities for language learning. Everything that you're doing, your daily routines, going on walks, you know, changing nappies, bath time. There's also much language inherently in that. And that's going to be really valuable for your child's development. So I think it's just about remembering that you're doing your best. And that sometimes the screen will happen and it doesn't need to be the enemy.
So it sounds like it's just all about balance and what's kind of working for you in that moment, right?
Yeah, I think balance is a really nice way to put it. And I think that's what all parents are trying to achieve is balance rather than unrealistic expectations around screen time. And there's so many other things that you can do outside of that screen time when you do have more capacity. But it's not something that you need to feel guilty about.
Okay, thank you.